Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache from NacheSnow.com. Welcome. So today we have Marcella Kriebel. Really excited to share her story with you. I think she is a good example of how when necessary, pivot. She was laid off unexpectedly. She started a daily art practice, which led to a cookbook, which led to her selling art prints, which led to her doing a brick and mortar, which led to her teaching courses. And she just continued through the years to build her business. And she talks about how there were some really rough times and some things that she did in order to make it along the way. But I just think her story really illustrates that if you love something, you just have to work hard at it and you just have to be strategic about your decisions, and eventually things will work out. So I think you're going to be really inspired by her story. I can't wait for you to have a listen. She mentions a lot of things in here that you probably will want to look up, but remember, I've got you covered. All of the links that she mentions are in the show notes. You could just go over to NacheSnow.com/127. And before we get into the episode, remember, sharing is caring, my friends. If you love this episode, please share away. If you love the podcast, please head on over to Apple Podcasts and give me 5 stars. I would greatly appreciate it. If you're listening on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up and a comment. That's always appreciated also. And I just wanted to let you guys know that at the beginning of the year, I did like this 7-day productivity challenge, and you could still sign up for it. All you have to do is go to NacheSnow.com/2021 and you will get 7 emails in 7 days. I recorded some videos just to walk you through some techniques in order to help you get more productive. So it's all free, and I really, thought through like what to share that would really be useful in a 7-day period. So if you're looking to get your stuff in order as the summer starts, definitely go check that out. NacheSnow.com/2021. All right, let's jump into Marcella's story. Here we go. Welcome, Marcella, to the Studio 78 podcast.
Hello. I am so honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm a big fan.
I am really excited to dig into all the things. I just love your work. I'm super jealous. I wish I could paint like you, but another life.
Oh, and you got to put in those 10,000 hours,
I know. I've got like maybe 100 in, and still I'm like, yeah, it looks like a third grader. But Marcella, before we dig into your day to day and how you do what you do, can you just tell the listeners a little bit about you before you started your business?
Oh, absolutely. Goodness, I have always been an artist, a busy bee, creator, maker type. So me before business was, I was an art handler, so an art installation technician, meaning that I contracted with public and private museums to install artwork. So I have a museum background, and so that was why I moved to Washington, D.C., because Smithsonian was there. So I interned there first, and then I got a job with a museum services company working all over public and private museums. And so I had kind of a, intimate sort of all these different experiences with art and artifacts and really interesting things that I love to, really be up close with. And so I think before my business that is, believe it or not, it's like 8 years old now, my art business. I had kind of this up close and personal daily life where I was with a lot of really interesting and exciting objects, artifacts, and art. So I was always inspired by all these special things I just tell you about. But I had an art practice, and I was a avid journaler, and I travel, a lot of travel, and
I
watercolor
miss
too.
travel.
Yeah. So before, it's like you said before how far you want me to go back. Um,
Right.
but before my self-employed art career, I was an art handler, to put things in a nutshell.
Well, that's interesting because it sounded like it was something that you enjoyed and you loved. So, what made you walk away?
I, I got laid off. I was heartbroken.
Um, mm,
I gotta be real. I was heartbroken. But as someone who is always busy, always making, and always kind of strategizing, I very quickly took the year that I had of self-employment and started a daily art practice, which
mm.
was making these illustrated recipes. And at the conclusion of that year, I launched a Kickstarter campaign that ended up funding my first illustrated cookbook. So
Wow.
I knew that about me, but that was really the genesis of my art career, which was this first illustrated cookbook that I initially self-published that had all these hand-lettered, hand-drawn recipes from my travels throughout Latin America.
Mm.
And it's available on my website. It's now a published project that currently actually is out of print, so there's a finite amount of them left in the world, but I still got some. And after that project, it was a great success on Kickstarter, and I ended up starting to make artwork to complement that cookbook project, which is why my
Oh.
talk is food related. So that watercolor, that first body of work, was created to kind of complement the illustrated cookbook. So, yeah.
So I gotta, dig in a little bit
You
to
do
this first year, of course, because I know I have listeners who are either in that same situation because of the pandemic, right? Where they're on unemployment and
it.
they're trying to figure out like what's next. And then I
Yep.
just also have people who also have, because I would consider that it was almost like a passion project, right? And so there
100%.
are people who have ideas for passion projects and are in the middle of passion projects. So I just want to dig into that a little bit because I think it'll help people just figure out how best to go about having a passion project and then take it to the next level. So my first question is, how did you even know what to do? Like,
That is such
like
a loaded
how,
question, right?
right? Because you
Oh,
could have did anything, right? So how did you know, like, okay, this is what I want my art practice to be?
begin however it feels right. So
Mm.
don't think about it too hard. Okay? For me, food is a way that I relate to the world and other people, history and culture, and it was a natural trajectory for me to record what it is that nourished me and allowed me to relate to others. And
Mm.
so cooking, that idea of making food, is also really an art form in and of itself and inspiring. And so this practice of recording what I was eating and what I was preparing was just kind of a natural extension to what was making me happy at the
Mm.
time.
Mm.
So I was unemployed, right? I was applying to all these jobs, hearing nothing back. I actually, what's it called? The federal portal for online applications. There's the first round are all these bots. So you got to get past those to even get, in front of an actual human. There were times when I never actually even heard back from certain
Mm.
jobs. But anyway, so that was all very, very, I was down. I was depressed. And so doing what made me happy was first on my agenda, which making stuff, we all know it's so therapeutic, right?
It
And
is.
food related things also is they're so uplifting, to create a meal and to also, as I was saying before, to record that meal visually is really just satisfying to me. So that wasn't just a natural, that was an easy extension to what was already making me happy. So getting back to what my advice would be, if
That was
if
good.
it's simple basic shapes that is kind of your thing, you get up in the morning and that is some sort of mindless practice, just do that. Do what makes you happy and what feels therapeutic. Baby steps. Don't try to create your magnum opus. Just
Right.
steps, little steps, and before you know it, these little basic practices that you set for yourself can amount to something really beautiful and big, maybe.
And how did you like plan that out? Did you say, I'm going to spend 1 hour every day doing this? Like how deep did you get with the commitment to it?
I did at the end. At the
Mm,
end of this year, when I knew I needed about, I think initially I started with 75 recipes. So, like
mm,
most big projects, you kind of set a goal and you pick it apart, you work backwards, right? So, I did the first few months, it was just very casual. Once a week, I would, illustrate the recipe of the thing that I was making. And a specific instance was I spent, oh gosh, I spent 4 weeks in Mexico because I was house sitting. And so I was cooking there, I was going to the markets a lot. And so I would intentionally record these ideas. And so the first few, probably about a dozen recipes came from that experience specifically of
mm.
the recipes I was making in San Miguel. And then I came back to the US, and that's when I got a little more serious. Like you were saying, it was like an hour a day. I would do all of the line work, so the ink pen, meaning I still use the same approach. I use a micron pen
Mm.
and pencil first, pencil and then micron, and then erase the pencil lines. So I would outline a certain amount of recipes first, and then the next day I would illuminate them in watercolor. So I did kind of pick
Mm.
apart the different stages. And again, this is a while ago. Our art landscape has changed so much. Like there was no iPad, there were no,
Right.
so I mean, there were early forms of like the Wacom tablet probably, but that wasn't my bag. I've always been, you
There was
know,
no Procreate.
there's no Procreate. Exactly. And I, I'm going on a tangent, but like the landscape was really different back then. There was an Instagram. So, sharing these processes as well as my technical steps, I think really reflected that time. All in the same, I still use the same art practice, but I've employed these other methods of digital art making too into my kind of cadre of tools.
No, I love it because I think if someone else is thinking about doing a passion project, they can kind of pick up on a lot of things that you've said here is like committing to doing it for a certain period of time. It also sounds like too you really had a goal in mind too. Like you wanted to do X amount, I think it was like 75 recipes by the end of the year, right? So even if you weren't as committed in the beginning, you were at the end, you were like, okay, I want to do this. So setting that goal, chunking out the time to do it, I think is really good advice for people. And then it sounds too as if you were sharing it too, right? Like you were sharing what you were learning online also.
I was not. I was sharing
Oh.
with my close circle, certainly. But at that point, I did not have an art business. I didn't have
Mm.
Instagram. I think I might have had a WordPress. Or no, not a WordPress. What's the
Oh my
Google
God.
blog? You know what I'm talking about. The
Not
Google,
Tumblr.
it's like that. It was that era though.
Yeah.
Uh, Google blog. It's the orange icon.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. It's oh my goodness, I can't even think of the name of it. It's
Oh gosh.
Blogger.
Blogger. It was, I think I had one of those. So you
Yeah.
might be able to dig that up, but honestly, I have not seen it for years and I didn't post very regularly. So even that idea of making something and sharing it in the online space was not front of mind for me at that point.
Mm.
So back in the dinosaur ages, it wasn't even that long
Right.
ago. But really, we do. Technology travels so fast. So
Well, question
anyway,
though, if you
yeah.
weren't sharing it, then for Kickstarter, how did you, since you didn't have an audience already built up, like how did you even
Great
get your
question.
Kickstarter to be known?
And here's the nugget of it. Kickstarter is an example of this, the primary and principal crowd sharing platform, right? And I
Right.
came into it at the perfect time.
Ah, it's all
The
about
old term
timing.
of catching the wave, right? And
Yeah.
I really did it. It was the conclusion of 2012.
Mm.
And at that point, they were growing relatively quickly. The thing that really set you apart from most is if you had a wonderful video, even just a video to begin
Mm.
with. So I teamed up with my friend Leslie Adkins, who now lives in Mexico City. She came over to my house and we filmed a video. So I shared with her, kind of fanned out all of my recipes and told my story and this desire to scan all of these things and bind them and print an edition of my first illustrated cookbook. So
Mm.
the video sort of wove back and forth between me cooking and then illuminating these line drawings. So she had some macro shots of me watercoloring. And props to her. It went viral in that time.
Ah,
And in a matter
good
of, what was
skills.
it, 8, 10 days, we did over $31,000.
Wow.
Yeah, which is like a ton of money in this era too. So that is my fairy tale story. And after that experience, I thought, I really got to give this art career a shot.
Right.
So I
Like this is cool.
deferred from the Corcoran College of Art, which is where I thought if I couldn't get a job in my museum services field, I'm going to go get a job or go get a degree, a master's degree in museum design. And at that point, I was ready to go to school the next year, but I
Mm.
deferred, and I didn't ever go back.
Wow.
Anyway,
So how did okay, so of course we need to get there. So you raise this money on Kickstarter. Everybody's like, I want this recipe book. And for the audience out there, I have one of her recipe books, which is absolutely beautiful.
which one do you have?
Um huh?
Which one do you have? The light
I
blue one?
have the one it's the
You
one I
have the
think that has the Mexican recipes.
So you have the one we're talking about. So there are
I
two.
have the
There are
original
two. You have, if it is it light blue or is it red?
red.
Okay, so you have the second edition. You have
Ah.
the expanded, fancier second edition. So when I did the Kickstarter campaign, I printed 2,000, and they are light blue, and they're a little smaller. It's a little more of a simple production. The paper isn't nearly as nice as the one that you have.
Yeah, I was like the
I
paper
printed
is really
those.
nice on the one.
Yeah. So my first edition was the Kickstarter one, and it's a beautiful hardback book. It's light blue, and those are the ones that people received in the mail as thanks for backing my Kickstarter project. And
Mm.
then the next year, a publisher reached out to me and wanted to publish it under their press. And so we did that a year
Ah.
later. And that's
Okay.
where comes in the red one that you have. Anyway.
Yeah, because I have the red one with that. I think it has like a green stripe on the side. Is that the one?
Yeah, it's got that cool edge paint.
Yeah,
Edge
yeah.
is when you look at the end of the book and the very, the very ends of all those pages are a certain color. Like sometimes
Yeah.
you see fancy, Bibles with gold pages on the end, right?
Yeah.
This one has neon green pages at the end.
It's gorgeous.
Anyway,
I saw
they
it
did a
because I think
beautiful
I
job
got it
producing
like
it.
it was like a few years ago.
Yeah, yeah. So
It's beautiful.
there's still some out there in the ether. I sell them on my website, autographed copies.
I'll have
Anyway,
to make sure I do like a flip through when I promote this episode of my personal copy,
there you
people.
go. Uh, I led you on a whole tangent here. I
Oh
apologize. You
no,
were
no
you were
worries. No,
getting to something that you wanted me to talk about.
no, no. This is good stuff. So, how did you? Because there's like a couple things here. Because
Yeah.
one, I definitely want to get to how you started your own business, but a lot of other people want to get in like their books or recipe books published too. So I have to touch on that a little bit. But before we even get there, so you have this successful Kickstarter. You're thinking about going to school, but you're like, you know, I think maybe I should go in this direction here. So how did you do it? Because of course at this point, right? You got to eat, you got to pay bills, you
Yep.
need money coming in. So, yeah, how did that work?
I was extremely frugal that first year. I lived in a group house. I sold my artwork and the remaining copies of the book at farmers markets in DC.
Mm,
So it wasn't just okay. So some farmers markets don't allow non-food items to be sold. But the way I got around that was I would do cooking demos and I would use local vendors' stuff. And so they usually would have these cooking demo plugs. And so I would go in as a author, cookbook author, and then be able to sell the books. And in addition to those, the art prints. So my illustrated feast series of art prints. And at that time, I only had maybe 12 or 14 different designs. But
mm,
that, because you talk about prints a lot and all these different vendors all the time on your shows, the cost of goods is really, really, really low, right? With
yeah.
prints. So when I was making all arounds, doing these pop-ups and stuff, the books, they're so expensive to produce that you don't really make a lot of money selling them. But the art prints is really what I lived on,
Mm.
and what I continue to live on now. Although my whole format's a bit different. It's mostly online now, but doing those open edition prints, I was going around to local farmers markets. I think at that point I started an Etsy site in 2013. Before that, my Etsy was all jewelry that I was making, which I didn't mention prior to this. Both my parents are artists and makers, and I have always had a hobby of making jewelry, even
Very
some
cool.
silversmithing and stuff. So I was starting
Oh wow,
at the
fancy.
site even before that doing jewelry stuff. But then the illustration stuff took over, as you
That was where the
know.
passion was. Yeah. The
Yeah.
love.
So selling on Etsy, doing those pop-ups. I don't know. I think at that point maybe I had an Instagram, but it was so personal. It wasn't, very monetized by any means. I wasn't selling through it. Again, 2013.
Right. But it's interesting because I think people, and I mean, of course, we're in the age of like the pandemic and things are a little weird right now. But I think people forget about the power of in person kind of relationships and selling to customers at events. Everybody thinks like everything has to be online, but there is something special about selling your items at like a market or a fair or what have you.
There really is. And that is the bedrock of my business. in-person exchanges. That I started doing more of these in-person shows, as mentioned, in 2013. And even all the way up until the pandemic, the majority of my revenue has been made thanks to in-person exchanges, in-person sales. So I would do, my season has always been first quarter, second quarter is kind of lean in terms of my income generated. But then you start getting into larger summer festivals, into fall festivals, and then holiday. So everything from, let's see. One of my first shows normally is the Baltimore Craft Mafia Spring Show.
Oh, yeah.
In Baltimore is the summer show in July. And then in the fall, go into doing H Street Festival and Adams Morgan Day and the Downtown Holiday Market in DC. So those have always been kind of like major points of sale for me, those in-person things. And when the pandemic hit, all that occurred. And I, as just like everybody else, had to really pivot. Thankfully, it wasn't like a total rude awakening. I already had my own custom website, which I've been optimizing ever since. Well, ever since ever. You're always getting better.
Right. It's always tweaking. But last year, you're like, I got to do those major tweaks, right?
Yes. Yeah. This time last year, here we are. What is the date? March 15th. Is it March 15th?
This was like kind of the week last year where everything just went.
Yeah. I think this day, I'm a day or two off perhaps, but this was the day that we found out that Tom Hanks had it. And like the NBA was closing. Like this was all mid-March last year, if you can remember that. So, our mindsets have changed so much. And has our business strategy.
I mean, now just to, catch people up. Now, Marcella, she has like her own store in Brookland.
That's right, Brookland.
I know, and not Brooklyn, New York, people. It's Brookland in DC. So
well put.
And so, and a lot of other stuff that you ended up doing over the years to grow your business. And so, wait, even before I get there, after the Kickstarter, how long did it take before you were like, okay, I can live off of this?
Well, I guess, I had a couple other jobs. I had a couple other odd jobs that first year and a half, maybe. And that was doing some contract graphic design. In university, I was a graphic design intern at my college, so I had those skills. And I'm a visual person. So I was doing some contract, like client-based work the first year and a half or so. And I still kind of do that sometimes, but it's not my main, the foundation of my business. And what else? I had a couple other just odd jobs, walking dogs and stuff. So I guess a year and a half, if that helps.
No, it does. And the only reason why I at least wanted to make sure I didn't forget to ask that is because someone might see Marcella today and they'd be like, oh my gosh, she has this cute little shop and look at her website and look at her social media. Like, wow, she was an instant success. And I just want them to know, like, the hard work that went into creating your brand.
Thank you. It's always getting better. It's an uphill battle, but it's a fun one, And I heard you say on one of your last podcasts, which was like, what is your hobby to someone? And I have to say, I do have things I love to do, but my passion is my art business. I work day and night at it, and I love it. So
that's awesome.
Always improving, and you're always getting better. And there's a lot of challenges to it. And success is always relative to what you're looking at, right? There's all these different scales of success, and you can set your sights on something bigger, and we all have goals, right? So I still feel like it's not like I'm sitting here eating bonbons feeling successful. No, no. You're your own worst critic.
There's always room to grow, right?
Exactly.
So the pandemic, right? I mean, and I'm on your website right now, and people definitely, of course, I'm going to have like a link to her website so you can check her out. Like, her work is really gorgeous. I do have this love for watercolor too. Like, I do want to be good at watercolor one day. I'm dangerous enough.
That's
I want to
get
better.
Building blocks right there.
Right. But on your website, you sell like your prints, but you also do workshops. So when the pandemic hit and you weren't able to do the markets in the summer, right? Because last year, I think there was still, by the end of last year, there were a few holiday in-person markets, but the summer of last year, there weren't really any markets at all. So
Right.
how were you able to survive? Like, how did you pivot? What did you end up having to do within your business to stay afloat?
So a couple things. I definitely posted more on Instagram right away. I sent more newsletters more frequently, and so kind of built that. So, and even to this day, I'm sending more newsletters just to really access my followers and my community so that they know what's new and they know what I have available, right? The virtual workshops. Previous to that, I actually was teaching in person pretty frequently. I would teach 1 to 2 classes at Union Market as what I called watercolor and cocktails. So I would provide a black and white illustration of an illustrated recipe of a cocktail and collaborate with Gina Tersavani of Buffalo and Bergen. And her bar would make these cocktails, and folks would come, sip on a cocktail, and I would teach them how to watercolor. So 5 basic techniques that they could employ into this black and white illustration that I had shared. That was the concept. Watercolor and cocktails went on for probably 4.5 years monthly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when the pandemic hit, I had to learn how to do that kind of stuff virtually. So currently I am doing Zoom workshops. We haven't done a cocktail theme yet, ironically enough.
I know, because people then could just bring their own.
We will be coming up here. I think I posted one for June. It's my first cocktail theme. But I do one called Let's Paint Produce. And so that one is actually, we start from scratch. So I invite people to bring their own food as subjects to paint. Yeah, so that one's fun. We're doing a cherry blossoms one, which is one where I supply the artwork. So I'll send it to them in advance, and then we illuminate it together. So 2 kind of formats, right? Where you start from scratch with watercolor paper, or I give you the line work, the outlines, and we color it all in watercolor. Anyway, I'm telling you about the workshops, but what was the question?
But no, hey, I am sure there are people listening who are like, tell me more about these workshops. Yeah. And I'm interested to know, too, how you were able to make them as engaging, right? Because it's in-person workshops and virtual workshops are very different. The feel is very different. And if you're used to teaching in person, how are you able to make that shift where you could still have like this good positive vibe going and people laughing and talking even though they're on a screen?
That is so hard to replicate, the laughing and talking and like fluid exchange. I still have not figured that out, to be perfectly honest. I do my best to be as thorough as possible. The one major plus about being virtual is that everybody has the best seat in the house.
Right, that is true.
Because I've got 2 cameras going. I've got one pointed at my face so people can see me articulate these ideas. And then I have another camera that is overhead, so a bird's eye view of my art process. And that I think is quite typical when you talk about art classes, where you can see what it is the facilitator or artist is doing. And they're showing you firsthand, and you have this wonderful up close view of painting and all these different techniques. So I do feel like I'm able to really articulate and then demonstrate to my participants quite well when it comes to that the camera angle thing. I think that's a really big advantage to really hitting home those ideas of these basic techniques, wet and dry brush, and all the different ideas.
Let me nerd out with you for a second, because I literally was just in a conversation about video the other day, because video is it's like a hot topic for entrepreneurs because they have to do workshops. And so everybody's like, can you ask people what is their setup? So do you use, like, what cameras do you use, tripods, like anything that you could tell people out there that are struggling right now with virtual workshops?
Okay. So currently I use my MacBook Pro, which is what you and I are, talking on right now. And that is my camera on my face. And then I have this overhead clamp that holds my iPhone. And that right now is my overhead camera. It could be better. I have a mirrorless fancy camera, Canon, that I use for still photography, and I know it's capable of video, but I have yet to get there and actually use it for this purpose that we're speaking about. I know that the quality of the image would be better, but I have found one of the biggest ways that you can improve your setup is by using great lighting. So I do my classes at 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. And I sit right by the window. I sit right by the window, so I got that beautiful natural light. Need it. I have a ring light. But I don't. It's okay, But I swear by the natural light. So that's certainly something people should take into account.
And then also, because I've never, of course, done like a virtual workshop where I'm teaching something. So when you say you're using, of course, your laptop, and then you have like your phone, are you using Zoom, and does Zoom know to show your phone? Is there something in the settings that knows when to switch, cameras? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you have to pay attention to the preferences. You log in on both devices. So my single account is logged into both devices. Does that make sense?
Oh, tricky. Okay. I was like, how are they doing this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then when you're on both devices, I guess you then can switch views.
Right. You can turn on and off. But the key thing is you have to mute one of your devices, because you don't want to get that playback.
Right.
The audio. Yeah.
You have just helped someone out. Someone is like, thank you, Marcella. As they try to figure out the virtual workshop world, you have saved their bacon.
If there's anything else that I know in that realm, I will share it. Part of that was trial and error. Like most people, you just got to ask questions, right? If you have questions. Another thing I would advise people, I would advise them to take other workshops. If you're thinking about doing it yourself, be a participant first. Yeah.
That is really smart. Yes. And as someone who's taken like several workshops, it really is interesting to see everybody's technique and how people get the conversation going, how they take breaks, the quality of their video. Now, I'm a little nerd, right? So I'm always like paying
Yeah.
attention to all that stuff. But for those of you out there, take a class that you're genuinely interested in, but then just also like find out what works about it, because then you can replicate it when you decide to do it. So I think that's great advice.
100%. Yep. People are welcome to message me, email me if there's any other questions they have specifically about it. I'll do my best to answer.
Before I get to the wrap up questions, one thing that I also know, like, the audience is going to want to know.
Yes.
And it's going back to the books you have published. And I think you said one of them, of course, went through a book publisher. So for that one, you didn't have to worry about finding your own printer or anything like that. But I think a lot of times creatives struggle, especially artists, with figuring out where to get their books printed, where to get their tea towels printed, where to get their prints printed. Like, how did you navigate all of that? How did you make the decision to go with different places and research them and all that good stuff?
I mean, just as you're saying, research, committed to it. Once you set your eye on something, then it's like, okay, who's doing it now and how are they doing it? And what's out there in the information highway to point me in that direction? Now, I do really pride myself in working with local vendors. And so my printer now is Basecamp DC, and I like them because they're right down the road. I can call them up and be like, hey, can you guys do this in one day? And they'll say, oh yeah, come on by. So I like that face-to-face kind of exchange I have with my vendor for my prints. And that's really means a lot to me. There's so many print on demand places now, which
there are
more about than I do. I quite frankly have not explored the print on demand world. It's growing fast, and there are dozens, if not hundreds at this point, different options. So I actually can't speak to that format. I print all my prints, in editions of 25 or 40, depending on kind of popularity, I guess. And they sit in my studio until someone orders them or walks into my retail shop on Wednesday, Friday, or Saturday, our current hours, we're open, to purchase it. So anyway, so all that inventory is sitting, and some people see that as a downside. It does mean I have to store all this stuff. So it's a different model for sure.
And I feel like there's not a right or wrong. It's just what you're comfortable with, right? Yeah.
Totally. And it's funny because the genesis of my business was 8 years ago. So in that era, there weren't print on demand options. So it's almost as if I've started with this format of running my business, and I'm kind of on the same track of I'll make an edition of prints, and I don't have a tremendous amount of space. I've got a studio that's like 450 square feet to store things and work in and whatnot. But I've kind of committed to that model of stocking what it is I have to offer the world in terms of creative goods. Books.
Love it.
Let's see. So my first printer is called Warzala. Let's see. WARAZOLLA, I think is how you spell their name. They are a printer in the Midwest. It costs a lot of money to print in the USA.
Yeah,
if you're trying to have a profitable, successful business and your only products are books, you're not going to make too much money. Anyway, so that's what I use for my self-published book, and the profit margins are so slim. But there's a lot of other options out there. You can make small editions that are paperback that are way more economical to produce than a hardcover book. Hardcover Smithsonian book that is beautiful inside and out, but again, isn't like the most profit forward product in the end. Okay, guide me. What else?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay.
I think that kind of at least gives them a sense. And you
Yeah.
know, on the podcast before, we've talked a little bit about that too, because
Yeah.
books are tricky. I think it's just tricky. Like even my journal is printed through Ingram Sparks, and then by the time, like I always tell people to purchase it on my website because then I can actually make a profit. Because by
Yeah.
the time someone sells it on Amazon, I make like $2 once Ingram takes their cut and Amazon takes their cut. Then I'm just like, okay. And people are like, well, why did you go through Ingram Spark? But it was because I want a hardbound book, and Amazon just
Yes.
does the soft cover, and the quality of the pages are better with Ingram.
You are articulating what you just said in the last 10 seconds is actually way more constructive advice in terms of is this, then that, than what I just said. I think in terms of you've got to commit to what it is that you want to make and then see what the price breakdown is. And you know, Ingram, like, it's a huge outfit and they have printers all over Asia probably. Mm-hmm. And they have the capability to produce things, lots of things, for way cheaper than the United States. And the industry's just not here for that hardback kind of product anymore. So, nope.
No, I think it gives people at least something to think about, because it really is all about choices. Do you want to have, like, I do have like some books that I have in my closet, so when people buy it off the website, I can sell it. But those books are taking up space too, right? So it's like, are you okay with that, right?
That's what I do. I've got cases of my own titles in my studio sitting around. Yeah, hanging out. But I would rather do that because it's like you said, then I will at least make a little bit of retail markup on that book, because the royalties are next to nothing when it comes to the publisher's cut, or my cut from the publisher. Yeah,
it's just like it's the reality of the situation, right? Unless you're selling, like, if you go on KDP, and which is the Kindle Direct or whatever for Amazon, and maybe you're writing a novel or something, maybe if you sell thousands of copies, you might make a little income. But even in some articles I've read, even then you have to like write multiple books, and multiple books have to sell X copies. So unless you're whatever author, famous author, you're going to need some more ways to make money than selling books. So, yeah.
If you're like, I don't know, Oprah, or like you wrote
right.
Eat, Pray, Love, or one of these New York Times,
the Elizabeth Gilbert, like, right.
You're Elizabeth Gilbert.
If that is not you right now, have a backup.
Or, okay, here you go. Or you have multiple avenues of revenue like I do. Right. And I'm not making tons of money, but I have a lot of different avenues. Okay, so the books don't make too much money, but it's a wonderful feather in my cap, and I adore having this sort of bound portfolio that is functional artwork for people to enjoy in their kitchen, along with my art prints, my stationery, some kitchen towels. What else? Ooh, I did a Birkenstock collaboration. That was so cool. With a guy his name is Michael Gray in New York City.
Collaborations are awesome. Yeah.
So exploring and dabbling, and the cost of goods of all of these things are different. But, you know, some are better than others. But altogether, it's good to have a few different avenues, you know.
And you guys have heard me on the podcast before talking. You got to diversify your income. You just can't have like that one thing, because if that dries up, then you're toast. Yeah.
Yeah. Events too. Virtual workshop you're talking about. That's another avenue. Anyway.
Right. Like you have to have, I feel like you have to have at least 3 or 4 things, you know? I mean, it's, usually related to your
Yeah,
core passion, but yeah,
I
events,
agree with that.
books, prints, right.
I'd agree with
Um,
that.
and then just a couple wrap up questions, even though people will kill me if I don't ask you one more question.
Uh-oh.
After the
Really?
pandemic, as we're going through this pandemic, a lot of people have decided to keep their brick and mortar store. And some people are like, oh my goodness, I'm like totally not doing a brick and mortar. I'm going to be just strictly online. For you, I mean, do you see yourself like sticking with the brick and mortar and doing stuff online?
I do, only because my brick and mortar space is my fulfillment center and my art studio. So it's
Mm,
designed where the first part of my studio is there's a partition and people can walk in and buy stuff, but that's also my space serves multiple purposes. So I do
mm,
plan on continuing to welcome people in, and I hope that our hours will be greater, like our open hours, I mean. But it definitely costs more to operate that way, to
yeah.
have a brick and mortar. My space, thankfully, is located in the Arts Walk Brookland, where we have sort of subsidized artist spaces. So another thing that you'll find with true form retail spaces is the square footage is quite expensive. And our art studios are cheaper square footage than
Mm.
the commercial kind of downtown corridor on average. So my overhead is probably less than a classic retail kind of space. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
glad
So
to hear that you say you're keeping it because I'm
yeah.
like, I just
Oh,
love going in like beautiful stores. So,
I thrive on human interaction, and because we're in this pandemic and we haven't had any festivals, which is where I used to interface with most of my customers, at least during these limited hours, I have had familiar faces come in, albeit masked. I have been able to interact with my fan base and my community, and that has emotionally really been wonderful,
Mm,
for sure.
mm,
Maybe we'll be wearing these masks for a while, and
probably.
I'll bet you, I don't think it'll be taboo to continue wearing masks.
I don't think so. I think it's now just normal,
Yeah,
right?
I think
Like
so
even a
too.
couple years from now, it'll be, I think we'll see half people wearing masks, half the people not. If people have a little bit of a cold, they'll wear a mask. I
I am
think
with
it
you.
will be
Yeah,
normal.
yeah, I am with you. I'm keeping my brick and mortar, and I feel like the mask thing, yeah, it's here to stay, you know?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
perfect. I know I've
yeah,
kept you way too long. Sorry.
no.
It was funny. I told someone last year, I was like, yeah, I'm going to keep my podcast episode short. And they were like, haha, sure you are.
We
So
covered a
sad.
lot.
Um, but just, I won't do the hobby question because we know what your hobby is.
There you go.
But I will just do one question, and that is how do you stay organized? Any tools, software, techniques like you got a
Mm,
lot going on, right? Like how do you stay sane?
I recently, so I'm not a big app person, but something that I recently use more and more, which is an upgrade from the classic Google, or I'm sorry, the classic Apple Notepad, the yellow
Oh,
app
yeah.
that's like the list maker. That's what I used for years. And about 8 months ago, I switched to Google Keep,
Mm,
which is Google's version of a to-do list. And the reason I like it better is it allows me to slide all the different to-dos by priority.
mm,
And it can you can check box things, which is also really satisfying, right? But that idea of being able to move these line items around is really nice. So I'll have, I don't know, 3 or 4 different Google Keep pages that are organized by theme. One being like current designs, another one being client projects and personal to-dos. They're virtual sticky notes, but the fact that I can move all those different priority items around is very satisfying. And
No,
check
and
them
it's
off.
all like in one place, and you can
Yeah, and
still like click it off.
it's easy to access from my phone. The app is quite good, and then I can also see it on my Gmail when I open up my laptop and immediately I'm on Gmail, so it's right there on the right hand side of my screen too. So it's fluid in that respect. So
Yeah, perfect. And then
yeah.
if you could just tell the listeners where to find you on social, where to find the store, your website, like they're like, Marcella, we love you, we want to support you. Where do we go?
So, if you are in the District of Columbia or in the DMV, you can find my art studio, my little retail stationery store, open Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Wednesdays from 4 to 8, Saturdays from 10 to 4, Brookland Arts Walk. And if you want to specifically reach out to me, Instagram, Marcella Kriebel. My name is spelled Marcella, and my last name, Kriebel, is Krieb as in boy, EL. And that spelling is also my website, marcellakriebel.com.
Perfect. And of course, you guys, all of this will be in the show notes. But Marcella, thanks for sharing all the things. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you get nothing else out of this episode, the one thing I want you guys to walk away with is start a passion project if you don't already have one. You just never know where it might lead. And regardless, let's say it doesn't lead anywhere. So, regardless of where it leads, it still will give you so much joy and so much fulfillment because you're doing something that you're passionate about. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll know that if it is something you're really passionate about, usually it leads to some goodness. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll start a business, but it might mean that you meet a community of people that you will connect with for years to come. You know, you just never know where it might lead. So, anyway, start that passion project if you have not already. Remember, the show notes for this page for everything Marcella mentioned is at nachesnow.com/127. If you want to sign up for the video 7-day productivity challenge, that is for free. Remember, you could go over to nachesnow.com/2021. And as always, if you love this episode, please head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave me 5 stars. If you're listening on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up. And wherever you're listening, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And share away, my friends. All right, until next week. Talk to you later. Bye.